My name is Kitty. The Easter dinner that just passed was the most unforgettable one in my life. I still vividly remember the moment when my father, Mr. Thompson, stood at the head of the table, glass in hand, with 22 pairs of eyes fixed on him. He announced that our family's 200-acre vineyard, which had been in our family for generations, would go to my older brother, Jake. Then, he turned to me. His eyes were cold, and his voice was filled with disappointment and anger. "You stopped being my daughter the day you left this land," he said. The room fell into a deathly silence. My mother, Mrs. Thompson, turned pale, and the forks on the table stopped moving. At the far end of the table, my grandmother, Grandma Rose, placed her wrinkled hands on her old-fashioned handbag, and I caught a glimpse of a yellowed envelope peeking out from the top. What my father didn't know, and what none of them knew, was that I'd spent the past 3 weeks poring over county records. These records revealed that his grand announcement was nothing but a lie, and Grandma Rose had been holding the proof for 30 years. Let me rewind to 3 weeks ago. I work as a title examiner at the county recorder's office, a job that's not very glamorous. I spend my days reading deeds, tracing property ownership, and settling disputes before they turn ugly. To my family, though, I was the black sheep who left. I grew up on the Thompson Vineyard, a place full of memories of grape picking, picnics, and the sweet smell of wine in the air. At 20, I left for night classes to get a business administration certificate, which I paid for all by myself. My father saw it as a betrayal of our family's legacy, but to me, it was just a different path. However, I never truly left. I was always there for Grandma Rose. I drove her to her doctor's appointments, fixed her old-fashioned radio, and sat with her on the porch, enjoying the warm breeze and the view of the vineyard. I thought being useful meant I was still part of the family, but I was about to learn how wrong I was. The vineyard was more than just land to us. It was our history, our pride. My great-grandfather had planted the first vines here, and since then, it had been the heart of our family. My father, a 70-year-old man who had dedicated his life to the vineyard, believed with all his heart that it was his to give away. Jake, who is 23 years older than me, never left the vineyard. He married Lily, and they raised their 3 kids in the big house on the property. While they lived on the vineyard, I lived in the town nearby, and this geographical difference became a dividing line in our family. A week before Easter, I came to the vineyard to drop off Grandma Rose's medicine. As I passed by the storage room, I heard Jake talking to Lily in a low voice. "Once Grandma signs, we'll be okay," he said. I didn't know what he meant by that, but I knew that in our family, the word okay often meant trouble. The next day at dinner, it was like a battlefield. My father waited until everyone had started eating, then put down his fork. "This vineyard goes to the one who stayed," he said, looking around the table. Jake didn't even lift his head, but Lily gave me a smug look. My father then started telling the old story about how his own father had treated him like an outsider on his own family's land. He pointed at me and said, "You chose the city over the vineyard, Kitty. Paperwork won't make this place thrive." I kept quiet. I'd learned long ago that arguing with my father was like trying to stop a storm. But something bothered me. He kept saying my vineyard, but I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen his name on any official document related to the property. I started to wonder if he really owned it. 2 days later, I found out what Jake wanted Grandma to sign. I walked into the kitchen with Grandma's refilled medicine and saw a stack of papers on the table in front of her. They were refinance papers. I recognized them right away. Jake was leaning over Grandma, his voice soft but insistent. "Grandma, it's just to get us through this difficult season. The bank needs your signature before the loan comes through." Grandma Rose, an 85-year-old woman with hands as gnarled as the old vines in the vineyard, folded her hands over her handbag. "Some papers, once signed, can't be undone. I learned that a long time ago," she said. Jake's patience ran out quickly. When he saw me in the doorway, he quickly gathered the papers and said, "Family business." I put the medicine on the counter without saying a word. Later on the porch, Grandma took my hand and held it tightly. She just looked at the vineyard and whispered, "Can't unsign." I drove home that night with a feeling of unease. Lily was in charge of the family's social events, and this year, she was organizing the Easter dinner. She called me on a Tuesday to tell me my seat. She'd put me at the kids' table, even though I was an adult. When I gently mentioned that Grandma's doctor had advised her to watch her sugar intake, Lily cut me off. "You don't get a say, Kitty. You left," she said. I tried to explain, I left the vineyard, not the family. She laughed mockingly and said, "Easter will settle a lot of things this year." My mother called me the night before I started my investigation. She'd been married to my father for 45 years, and over time, she'd become silent to keep the peace. "I think you should let your father have his way, honey," she said. I asked her what my father was planning for Easter, and she said he wanted to make an announcement about the vineyard. She also mentioned that Grandma always carried her handbag like it held the key to the whole vineyard. The next morning, I sat at my desk at the county office and decided to find out the truth. I pulled up the property records and traced the ownership of the vineyard back in time. To my shock, about 30 years ago, the ownership had changed. The vineyard had been transferred into a trust called the Rose Thompson Living Trust, with Grandma Rose as the trustee. My father had been working on land that he didn't actually own. I also found out that Jake was in a tight spot. A friend who worked at a local bank told me that the vineyard operation had a balloon payment of $1,500,000 due right after Easter. To refinance, he needed Grandma's signature as the trustee. That's why he was so desperate to get her to sign the papers. My father found out that I'd been looking into the records. He called me, shouting, "I hear you've been snooping around in my business at the courthouse." I told him it was public record, but that only made him angrier. "This vineyard goes to the one who stayed, not the one who snoops," he said. I asked him if he'd ever seen the deed, and the silence on the phone told me everything. He hadn't. 2 days before Easter, I drove Grandma Rose to her doctor's appointment. In the car, she opened her handbag in front of me for the first time. Inside, there was a yellowed envelope with the words Rose's instructions. "Open when Thompson forgets whose it is" written on it. Underneath the writing, there was a county recorder's stamp. "I've carried this for 30 years, she said. "I'll know when to open it." I asked her if my father knew what was in it, and she said, "Your father forgot a long time ago. It was my mistake to let him believe." That evening on the porch, Grandma told me the whole story. 30 years ago, my grandfather was on his deathbed. My father had made some bad business decisions, and the vineyard was on the verge of being sold to pay off debts. Grandma, in a last-ditch effort to save the family's legacy, had my grandfather transfer the vineyard into the trust. She'd always intended to hand it back to my father when he was more responsible, but he never seemed to learn. She'd kept quiet to avoid conflict, but now, it was time for the truth to come out. By Thursday, Lily had spread the rumor that I was trying to take the vineyard from Jake and his kids. My aunts called me, scolding me with fake concern. When I called Lily to ask her to stop, she said, "You don't get a say. You left, and now you want to take what Jake built." I told her I was just the one who bothered to look at the facts. On Easter morning, the vineyard house smelled of freshly baked bread and the sweet aroma of grapes. The large dining table, which my great-grandfather had built, was polished to a shine. Grandma Rose walked into the hall and wound the old grandfather clock, which was always 4 minutes ahead of time. On the sideboard, I saw a manila folder, Jake's refinance papers, waiting for the right moment. Before the meal, my father took me out to the porch. He said, "You came here to ruin this for your brother." I told him I was there to protect Grandma. He looked at me with cold eyes and said, "You stopped being a Thompson the day you left." I wanted to tell him the truth right then, but I held back. I said, "Funny, the deed never got that memo." He didn't understand, but I knew it was time for the truth to be revealed. Inside the house, I overheard Jake and Lily talking in the pantry. Jake was saying, after Dad's toast, when she's emotional, I'll bring out the papers. She won't say no in front of everyone. I realized that my father truly believed the vineyard was his to give, and Jake was using him to get what he wanted. Grandma found me by the window. She asked, "Did you read it?" I told her I had the deed and the trust memorandum. She nodded and said, "Good. Then you'll know I'm not making it up when I open this." She put her hand on mine and said, "You never wanted the land, Kitty. You just kept showing up for the people on it. That's the only thing that matters." During the meal, everything seemed normal until my father stood up, raised his glass, and made his long prepared speech. He talked about the vineyard, about our family's history, and how Jake had earned the right to inherit it. Then he turned to me and said those cruel words again. Just as Jake was about to reach for the folder, there was a soft click. Grandma Rose opened her handbag and took out the yellowed envelope. I stood up and placed my copy of the deed on the table. I said, "Dad, before anyone signs anything, let's read what's on file." Grandma started to speak. "Before my son hands out my vineyard, the table should know whose it is. 30 years ago, I put this vineyard into my trust. Your grandfather signed it from his sickbed, and we recorded it at the county." She laid out the papers, and I placed my copy beside them. "This is the county's copy of the same deed. It's been public record for 30 years, I said. Lily was the first to react. She stood up, shouting, "This is ridiculous. She's confused. Kitty put her up to this." I calmly pointed to the recorder's stamp on the deed and said, "There's nothing confused about a recording date. It was filed when I was a child." My father exploded. He stood up, pounding the table. 30 years I've worked this land. It's mine," he shouted. Grandma calmly read the letter she'd written 30 years ago, explaining why she'd put the vineyard in the trust. As she read, my father's face turned pale. He tried to say those cruel words again, but they had no effect. I said, "You keep saying that, but Grandma just gave me the Thompson name tonight. It's not about the land, it's about who you keep coming back for." Grandma then said, "I've named Kitty my successor trustee. When I'm gone, she'll hold this land in trust for all of us." My mother, who had been silent for so long, stood up and walked over to me, putting her arm around my shoulders. Grandma turned to Jake and said, "I know about the balloon payment. The answer is no. But on Monday, we'll sit down with a financial advisor and find an honest way through this." Jake sat down, his head in his hands. After that Easter, things changed. Jake and Lily moved into a rental in town for a while. My father never said he was sorry, but in July, he called me and asked me to help him review a lease agreement. Grandma is still with us, and I'm now the successor trustee. I've set a boundary. I'll hold the vineyard in trust for the family, but I'll never let anyone who doesn't read the facts decide my fate again. I've learned that loyalty is about the people, not the land. This is my story. One Easter, 22 witnesses, and a yellowed envelope that changed everything. If it makes you think about the true ownership of the things your family fights over, go and find out. And if someone you love needs to hear this, share it with them. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.